Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
This week's episode is going to be a mini review episode where Jake and I are each going to delve into our deep-ish, but not fully deep dive thoughts on 3 games each. We're going to cover District Noir, SolForge Fusion, Through the Desert, Bullet Heart, Startups, and Ark Nova. So get your zebras ready for first impressions. I think, Jake, I'm curious.
I'm not going deep thoughts. I'm going like shallow.
You're going shallow thoughts.
I'm in the kiddie pool.
How many times have you played each of these games, roughly?
I've played 3 games of SolForge Fusion, and I've played 1 game of the other 2.
Sweet.
So
okay.
It's like, this is like, first play impressions for me.
Cool. Kiddie pool thoughts.
And these are games I've got to the table, which I think makes it a little bit different than most of our reviews on this show. If you don't know, are primarily played online digitally. That's kind of the only way that Brendan and I can feasibly play games enough together, since we don't live in the same place, to do deep dives on this show. Yep. So once we've had every few weeks or so, it seems like a good opportunity to talk about some recent plays on the table and how much we enjoyed them. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to approach it. I've played one of my games 16 times digitally, and the other 2, like 5 or 6 combined plays between them, and played them on the table. So I think pretty much the same for me. We want to be clear that these are more like our Jake's post Geekway episodes, and we're hoping to integrate this format a little bit more in the show because you all seem to really love it.
Yeah, I think we should just call it like 6 recent plays or something like that.
Cool. Awesome. I like it.
Great. Okay, before we get started with those, a little bit of housekeeping. I want to make an appeal to you listeners for written podcast reviews. We have 25 written reviews at present between Apple Podcasts and Podcast Addict. Those are sort of the 2 platforms that I know of that I can actually see reviews that have come in. And we did, Brendan, I don't know if you know this, but we did get a review this past week from Matt H. on Podcast Addict that says 5 stars. I love the What We Talk About episodes. That's it. Clean, simple, beautiful, perfect. That's what we're looking for. So we have 25 reviews right now, and Brendan and I are going to set the goal of 30 written reviews. Just 5 more people listening of the 1,000 or so people who will listen to this podcast, taking 30 seconds to go onto iTunes or Podcast Addict, whatever is easier for you, and write a quick review. If we get to 30 reviews, or when we do, Brendan and I are going to record a bonus episode that's going to be a Decision Space After Dark episode. Things are going to get a little bit loose, and we are going to answer questions found on Reddit board games. So that's the plan. Please write us a review. Give us 5 stars. That'd be awesome. Really help us kind of with our discoverability. We're not the best at marketing our show. And that's that. Thanks for your patience, and let's get right into the show.
Let's absolutely get into it. And I think that I'm going to take the first one because I want you to have the last word with Ark Nova.
Oh.
So I'll kick us off by talking first about a game called District Noir, which is a 2019 card game previously known as Throne and Grail. It's been released as both, but to my knowledge, they're completely the same game. And the designers are Nobutake Dogen and now Shimamura. District Noir is a light card game, set collection style card game for 2 players. It's only a 2-player card game, Jake. And the deck in this game is made up of a series of cards of set values. So there's 5s, 6s, 7s, and 8s. There's also some positive point cards that just give flat points, and some negative point cards that give negative points, and also 3 city cards. The way that you win District Noir is either by collecting sets of those cards. So whoever has the most 5s would get 5 points. Whoever has the most 6s would get 6 points, 7s and 8s, so on. You'll also sum up your positive point cards and your negative point cards. And whoever has the most points at the end wins. You also get points for runs, 5, 6, 7s, and 8s. But So that's one way you can win. But if any player ever collects all three of the city cards, they win the game immediately.
Ooh.
The way that that's exactly how it feels when you're playing, except it's also like, oh, please don't let them have the city. If you've let your opponent get any of them. But basically the way this works, Jake, is you're each dealing from a shared deck. And then you start with a hand of cards at the beginning of each round, and you're going to play cards down to a shared display from left to right. So there might be 2 cards already out there. And at the start of each turn, you have a simple decision. Do I want to pick cards up or play 1 card down from my hand? If you pick cards up, you pick the 5 most recently played cards up from that card row. And then that's the only time you can pick up cards in that round. You'll never be able to pick them up in that round again. And the game is played over 4 rounds. So you go back and forth until each of you pick up cards, and then you play if there are any cards remaining in your hand, you play them down, get a new hand of cards, and go again. It's a very simple game that plays out really quickly. Playing this online on Board Game Arena, you can get a game in about 5 minutes real time. Async, it's a little longer, but
It's like 6 days.
6 days, yeah, something like that. 5 days,
5 minutes or
pretty
6
much.
days, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But I will say that this game came highly recommended from the Board Game Barrage podcast. Kellen, the Red Tank on that show, really enjoys this game. So that's kind of how I got clued into it and went to try it. And I will say that it absolutely does not disappoint. I find District Noir's decisions around the opportunity for bluffing and hand management, trying to figure out, should I be the one who's trying to pick up cards first in this round or maybe second? What information do I want to present to my opponent about sort of if I'm going to pick up early or late is really fun. And then the city cards are interesting because of that instant win condition. They create these really tense moments of pressure where you're trying, essentially once you have 1 or even 2, you can really use that to exert pressure on your opponent because they can't afford to put themselves in a situation where if they pick up early, you then play the city card and could potentially win. So it's all about trying to figure out how to get the most value out of the position that you're in. I find this game to be fun. It's quick. It plays out fairly similarly each time, but the more I play it, the more interesting the decision space gets, and the sort of more nuanced I feel like my ability to make decisions is.
That's kind of like with Lost Cities, right? Where you play it and you're just sort of playing out your cards the first time, and then the more you play it, the more you're like, ooh, this is like a really interesting kind of organic decision space. Is that the type of game that like this is a number on cards game? I'm having a little bit of a difficult time understanding exactly how the mechanisms work. Is this more like a Jaipur or like a Lost Cities? Like what is the game that it's like most analogous to? Because it's not like trick taking.
No, that's a really interesting question. It's almost, I want to think about how to approach this. It's almost like
A mix between what two?
it's like a mix between Sushi Go, except you're just drafting from a shared hand that you're building together on the table because you're working towards these sort of sets, right? Like where you want to have the most 8s.
So on your turn,
then
what do you do?
on your turn, you make the decision: do you play a card from your hand
To the middle.
or do you to the middle, or do you pick up cards from the middle? So it's sort of like a mix between, I guess, Sushi Go and Lost Cities a little bit in that way. But
And once you
it's
pick up
tough.
cards from the middle, you're out of the round?
You're out of the round in the sense that you'll never be able to pick up cards in that round again, but you will still play cards from your hand. So there's times where
So what
maybe
would
the first
stop
4.
the other player from just not picking up until you've like then played out all the cards from your hand?
Sure. So what might stop them is maybe you pick up early and then you've saved all of these negative cards that you're going to then slam down on the table, right? Because you've loaded the early cards to be the positive point cards and some of the higher numbers. So maybe that's incentivizing them to take it. If they pass, you'll take it, and then you've saved your cards.
And then,
later.
okay, so once
Or
both
maybe,
people pick up, then that just goes into your like scoring pile.
yeah, you just have a scoring pile.
Okay, this sounds pretty cool. I
on
want to
the
try
table in
this.
front of you.
I'm thinking I'm getting it
Yeah,
now.
let's play
Yeah,
it.
let's do it.
I think you dig this game, Jake. It's quick, it's easy, and the fun thing about it is your ability to bluff. Because originally the sort of negative positive cards, I was sort of felt like they didn't feel like they belonged in the design. The more you play, you appreciate they range in value from 1 to 4. How much? Oh, like the +3 came down. Is my opponent going to try to take soon, or a negative comes out and it's like, oh, maybe they're trying to wait. And I think there's lots of interesting things about opportunity costs that come up too. Yeah, let's try
All
it.
right.
I think you dig it. Overall, I recommend District
Cool.
Noir.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get into my first game. And this is honestly the one that I'm most excited to talk about. And that is SolForge Fusion, a 2022 collectible card game by one Richard Garfield. Maybe you know of his work in this kind of genre. If you've heard of Magic the Gathering or Keyforge, a couple of pretty popular games that he's done. And then also joining together with Justin Gary, the designer of Shards of Affinity and Ascension. So they've collaborated, two of the kind of, I don't know, people with a lot of experience in this collectible card game, dueling card game space, and they've come up with SolForge Fusion. Have you played Shards of Infinity or Ascension, Brendan?
I've played Ascension. I have not played Shards of
What do you
Infinity.
think of it?
I think Ascension is
Okay,
fine.
I haven't
I would
played it.
rather play. Yeah, it's I'd rather play Star Realms. Honestly, it does a
It's
similar
a
thing.
deck
There's this
building
card
game,
row.
right?
It's a deck building game. Yeah,
Like an
where
early deck
it's
building
it's
game.
very early. It
Mhm.
came sort of right after Dominion, and its innovation was this shared purchasing card row. I don't know if it or Star Realms came first, frankly, but it has that same thing where you're dealing cards from a shared deck, and then you're buying from a shared row instead of a big display like
Yeah.
Dominion. It's good. It's
I've
fine.
heard, and
I
I've
don't
heard
know.
Shards of Infinity is
People
really
like it.
good. I think
Yeah.
I've heard like a lot of positive reviews, but I haven't played it myself. So anyway, that's the designer background for SolForge Fusion, and what SolForge Fusion is sort of the people have described it as the spiritual successor to Keyforge, and I think that makes a ton of sense for a few reasons. So once again, you have these algorithmically generated decks of cards, just like in Keyforge, except for instead of just using a single pack of cards as your entire deck in SolForge Fusion, you have to take two of these packs and shuffle them together. So there's four different colors in the game, and you have to always pick two different colors. Kind of think like Magic the Gathering colors. In this, you've got purple, which is sort of like zombies, green, that's like big creatures, blue, which is like artifacts, kind of metal stuff, and red, which is like dragons, right? In aggression.
So 4
Yeah,
colors.
four colors. So you
Okay.
like you can't do like two red decks together. You'd have to pick like a red
Sure.
and a blue.
Sure.
And those,
And decks are small, right?
yeah, so I think 20 cards each so that you'd have a
Okay.
40 card total deck. I think that's right. And then the other interesting thing about it is each deck also comes with its own sort of captain or commander or whatever you there's a term for it in SolForge Fusion that I don't know. But what this so you'd pick one of the two decks you're shuffling together, and that gives you sort of special one-time abilities. In the second, third, and fourth and final round of the game, you'd have an ability on that card that you can activate once, which it might
Hmm.
just say like destroy any creature or turn any creature's power to zero, that type of thing. And it's sort of a use it or lose it in that round. So that's cool too, in that if you were interested in doing the deck building, not only are you trying to pick two decks that synergize together, but then you'd also have the option of like which of the two commanders synergizes best with what you're trying to do. I haven't really messed with that at all. I've in my 3 plays this game, I've just picked two random packs and shuffled them together and just grabbed one of the commanders. So I haven't really thought through, you know,
Cool.
synergies or anything. But it's kind of neat that it gives you just a hint more control than in Keyforge. That's going to be a pro to some people and a con to other people, of course. And then it has the same thing with like, you've got your custom deck names and stuff that are just like kind of silly. I don't know. That's an
G-
interesting thing where I feel like when Keyforge came out, I was like so into it, and now that it's
yeah.
appearing in some other game, I'm just kind of like, huh, that doesn't really add much for me at this point. You
Sure.
know, like the first week of
Yeah.
Keyforge coming out and seeing like the really silly names that were popping up, I was like, this is
Yeah.
this is fantastic. But now you kind of like know what the algorithmic jumbled deck names can be, and they're just like, they don't know.
I think we've also just culturally come a little bit of a ways since just from a chatbot and like per artificial text since Keyforge. So it just feels a little bit less special.
Yeah,
It kind of feels like we should be making more sense than ancient Stormy of the
yeah.
House of
Right. I
Yeah.
had one of
It's a
mine was like this
backyard shed.
something like murder escorts, which I liked. That's
That's kind
pretty
of cool.
good.
Yeah.
Um,
It almost makes
but and
sense
the
as a
other
thing.
interesting thing too is SolForge Fusion has like fully adopted the uh like in Keyforge it was like enhancements. So it's like not just that
Yeah.
you have an algorithm creating your deck, but that algorithm can change cards in your deck. So in like the first starter set of SolForge Fusion, there's something like 6,000 unique cards because many
Wow.
of the cards you could get could be like, I'm going to make up a name of a card because I don't know them, because it could be like a raging boar, or it could be like a
Hmm.
scavenging boar, or it could be like a tough
Mm,
hide boar or something like that, right? So each of those cards is actually like a little bit different in that it might have a
sure.
different power or a different defense or a different ability of some sort. Okay, so that's kind of a neat thing too, just from like a where we are with game design perspective. That hey, this is sort of something that's possible now. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the background for what this game is and why it's the spiritual successor to Keyforge, is that it's just really leveraging that algorithmic design, in some sense, and even like greater degree. Um, and the way the game works though is pretty cool. So in each of those packs of cards, you have 3 copies of each card in that pack. Okay. No, okay, so there must be 15 unique cards in each deck or pack,
Yep.
but then there's 15 level ones, and then those same 15 cards also appear with a silver border that are level 2 versions, and then they appear once more as the level 3 version that's upgraded. So the key hook and unique mechanism of this game is every time you play a card, you remove that card from the game. If it's an instant spell card, you just immediately remove it from the game after resolving its effect, and you shuffle, or no, you don't shuffle, you put the level 2 version of that card into your discard pile, so that when you reshuffle and see that card again, you'll be seeing the upgraded version of it. And then if you play it again, then you get the gold version of it, and if you play it again, nothing goes back into your discard pile. So at that point, you're actually weakening your deck. The same thing is with creatures. Those are the only 2 types of cards, except for creatures obviously stay out on the board until they die, at which point they're removed from the game. But when you play it, the level 2 version of it is shuffled into or goes into your
Mm,
discard pile. So what that means when I compared this to Keyforge is that like Keyforge is a hand management game. We've talked a lot about that on our Keyforge episode, and so much of the decisions you're making on your turn is like tied into this fundamental question of like crafting hands that's going to help you to succeed in the game. And
yep.
SolForge Fusion flips that on the head, and it becomes instead a deck management game in kind of a
Mm,
unique
hmm.
way that I haven't ever really seen or experienced before. Because there are a lot of really interesting questions as you play through the game about what to upgrade and when. Um, you could go for a strategy of like just trying to upgrade all your level 1 cards, right? So that you get to like a fully level 2 deck. Or you could say like, oh, I got a level 2 card in the second round of the game, so I'm going to try and like push this to like level 3 right away and get some type of advantage. But then that'll mean, in that third and fourth round, you're more likely to be drawing a level 1 card that at that point does basically nothing for you. So yeah, I just found that really interesting and fun as I was playing through the game. And the other key takeaway I had playing this game was like it really triggered a sort of sense of nostalgia for me of when I was first getting into Magic the Gathering. And uh you would have these like just like huge creatures that were really exciting, like, oh, you've got like the Thorn Elemental. It's like a 7/7 that does damage when it's blocked. Like, what the heck? Like, how could you possibly counter that? Like,
Sure.
overpowered cards. Like, you've got that card's like a 13/13. You know,
The Crows and Crowds
yeah, that's the
creatures.
one. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was
Yeah.
thinking of.
Yeah.
I kind of remember like being in elementary school and like somebody like is like showing me that in the back of the classroom or whatever. I'm just like
Yeah.
13,
Yeah.
13,
Totally.
like what the heck? And this like has that. By the time you're getting into the third level cards, like the sense of discovery is so strong. And you're just slamming down, like, in the first couple rounds you've got like 5/5s or whatever, and then by the time you're playing a third level card, they're like 17 power, 12 defense with some crazy ability that just totally warps the game. And unlike basically any other uh dueling card game I've played, like it actually feels like good to have these strong cards,
Mm,
because
cool.
you can only ever play one card on your turn. You just take turns playing one card, no mana cost, nothing like that. You can just play one. So you want to be playing the most impactful card you can on your turn, um, all the time. So to me, it feels like it sort of solves this issue of like these like high resource investment creatures and powerful effects that like so often in competitive card games when played competitively are just not worth the investment. And here it just feels like so satisfying, fun, and actually like a good decision like in the game to be playing out these giant monsters. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with this game, and I think it's a fun one.
Okay, question for you. You've dipped your toe into this and Flesh and Blood.
Yes.
If you were told you play this more or Flesh and Blood more, which table are you sitting down
Yeah,
at?
so I think it is a obvious choice between the two, and that's going to depend on what you want out of the game. If I was like, I want to like get into a game and go deep and potentially, and think through the deck building and strategizing and go to tournaments and follow the competitive scene, it's Flesh and Blood 10 out of 10 times. I think it's like the more to me, I get the sense that it's like
Competitively
the
tuned.
better competitively tuned game. Whereas
Yeah.
if I wanted to, be a board game generalist and try one of these games like once at a game night, like you're going to get a lot
Yeah.
more, I think, out of SolForge Fusion. You're going to have a really fun, full experience in that very first play. It's so simple, to play. There's no like, at least at this point, since it's just the first starter sets out. Actually, I think they recently released another one. Like the game hasn't gotten too convoluted yet, so you can really just sit down, learn it in 15 minutes, and like have a great time just exploring the absolutely insane cards in your deck. So I would guess for most of our audience, I would point them towards SolForge Fusion over Flesh and Blood, just thinking like that they're probably not necessarily like looking to like start a new lifestyle game. But if that's what
Sure.
you are looking for, then I don't think at my first play that SolForge Fusion is gonna hold up super well to like the fine tuning and like the searching for like the best iteration of every possible deck type of thing, which is honestly the same problems that I found with competitive Keyforge. I feel like that might even be exacerbated here with that like little bit more
Sure.
deck building involved.
Did you find so I'm really intrigued by this. I'm sort of like tepidly interested, mostly because I'm intrigued by the upgrade system,
Mhm.
which sounds so cool. Like as a decision framework, getting to add an upgraded card and having this broad range of choices potentially, but based around what you play. But did you find that it was a lot of upkeep? Like is playing it on the table is it just
You
annoying?
know, that's a totally fair question. So the short answer is yes. But the annoyance of upkeep is less around the upgrading cards, because oftentimes
Mm,
like you play your turn and then you get your upgrade out while your opponent's going on their turn. So it
yeah.
doesn't actually
Oh,
create
sure.
much downtime. But there were a
Yeah.
couple times in the game when I've sort of been like looking at my, you can also like sort of like know how many upgraded cards you should have in your discard pile before you reshuffle. And I'm like counting it up, and I'm like, I'm one card short. Like what is
What
missing?
card am I missing?
Yeah. So that
Yeah, that's
that was kind
annoying.
of annoying. But the truly like thing that makes this game just like a pain in the butt to like the fiddliness of this is that there's persistent damage and upgrade power like
Oh,
all
yeah.
over the place. So you'll have like a
Mm.
13/13 that had like +3 health and power, and then it takes 6 damage, and like just like you're trying to track like all of this across like 5 cards in the 5 different
Ugh.
lanes. uh
It's like token
it
soup.
really became, I
Yeah,
guess people who play this like a lot get like red and green 10-sided dice that they can sort of just like place on the corners of their card to change the
sure.
attack and health. because really there are just like effects all over the place. Like give all your cards +1 power, give all your cards +2 health, and those are like different things you're tracking all the time. And that was really a pain in the ass. So that I found fiddly much more than the upgrade system, which was surprisingly smooth. And the last thing to say about this is SolForge Fusion does, I think, a really cool thing that dueling card game enthusiasts like myself have been asking for forever, which is that they are each deck you buy has like a QR code and you can scan it into a digital client. Right now, that digital client is just Tabletop Simulator, but they're apparently producing like an actual uh,
Website or
website
something.
or on an official online way to play, um, so that anything you own physically, you just also own digitally, which is
Digitally. Interesting.
fantastic,
That's cool.
consumer friendly way of doing things when compared to Magic or any of the other games that ask you to buy your deck twice, physical
Yep.
and online if you want to play it, or Keyforge, which has an amazing like community driven digital implementation of it, but hasn't as of yet sort of facilitated an official online way to play that could
Yeah.
theoretically like track your rank and all that stuff. So I
Yeah.
sort of have high hopes that this is, I don't know if this would be like the future for these type of games just because I'm a little pessimistic, but it definitely seems like an awesome and consumer friendly way to do it that I hope is, supported by players.
You kind of just made me want to play Keyforge. Um,
Yeah,
but that was Jake's take on SolForge Fusion.
great.
Okay, Jake, I'm taking us back to small box land. Have you ever played the 2017 Oink game,
I have
Startups?
not.
So Startups is a Jun Sasaki game, which I've learned. So Jun Sasaki is one of Oink's most prolific designers. He's the designer of Startups, A Fake Artist Goes to New York, Deep Sea Adventure, and Maskmen, which I would say are four of the heaviest hitting games in Oink's catalog of games that come up as the Oink games not to miss. Games that I think maybe come alongside those as other really popular Oink games are games like Durian, Insider, and most recently Scout. So I was excited to try Startups. It's a beautiful package, just like most of Oink's games. It's felt and it's quick to get to the table. Startups is a game in which players, it's a light card game in which players are all collecting shares of different companies. So there's companies ranging in value from, I think, 3 to 10, something like that. And you have a 3 card hand, and on your turn, you're basically going to invest in a company or draw new companies that you could later invest in. And then you're going to score points at the end of the game based on the companies that you've invested in. But the player who's collected the most shares of a given company gets paid out by players who have also collected those shares but don't have the most at the end of the game. So, Jake, if I had 7 shares of the blue company and you had 3 shares of the blue company, hypothetically, you would have to pay me 3 point tokens that get flipped over for at the end of the game. So I'm going to score more for kind of goading you into investing in a company that I ended up having majority share in. One nice twist of this is that your hand of cards, at the end of the game, they don't get put away. They just get revealed onto the table. So there's some uncertainty about who's going to be winning what companies. You might build up a hand, right, where you have 3 shares of the same company. Jake over here is thinking he's winning that company, going into the end feeling strong. You play those 3 cards down at the very end. Surprise! I actually control the winning share, and now Jake has to pay me a bunch of points. So I thought the framework of Startups sounded really interesting, and I was excited to play. I played it 3 times back to back, and I felt that, unfortunately for me, the decisions just felt a little bit. It was maybe a little bit hard to get a sense for how my agency within the system and just player agency in general would play out. There's a lot of needing to read the table. And it seems like the cards can just not go your way, which is fine for a light card game like this. But I think in some ways it's scratching a similar itch to a game like High Society or even Scout, which is plays into that hand management idea as well and accommodates large groups. Both of those games do to some extent. And I think that at the end of our third game, we just sort of said, let's just play Scout instead. We'll have a more fun time. So I think, unfortunately, this one turned out to not really be for me.
That's a bummer. Yeah, what's it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think like if you had played this before you played Scout, you would have had a more favorable impression, and then this like Scout just does everything better.
Maybe I think they're not exactly the same
Okay,
game, so I
but
wanna
just like
I
in the
do wanna make
same
sure.
space.
Yeah, like within the same space of a game
Yeah,
night, I feel like they're fulfilling a similar footprint. They're definitely doing different things, but I think that I might have had a similar impression where my take is that almost every game is going to play out kind of similarly with the same companies kind of fulfilling similar roles, and we ended up with some interesting group dynamics. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me because I love like games with lots of uncertainty and games that are random, but I want to feel like I have enough agency that I can make meaningful and interesting decisions, and I'm just not sure there's quite enough here. And there's enough to teach that I'd rather just teach Scout, which is probably a slightly harder teach, but a much more rewarding decision space
yeah, Scout
than
rocks
sort
so
of.
hard.
Yeah, Scout's awesome. We're going to cover Scout on the show, I think. Right,
Yeah, I
Jake?
mean, at least in some capacity. Maybe as
Yeah,
a full episode, maybe as like a I don't know. But yeah,
a double dip deep
something
dive or
like that.
something. Yeah. I think that I definitely see why people are attracted to startups, and it absolutely has a large group of fans. But yeah, for me, I think it's going to take a backseat for Scout for the time being.
Yeah. I don't know, man. So Oink Games is just like a weird one for me where they definitely have some cool games like Scout Rocks. I think
Yep.
Deep Sea Adventure is pretty great for a roll and move game, but it's also a roll and move game. And then a lot of the other ones I played are just like almost awesome, but don't hold up to where I
Yep. Have you?
wonder if like, oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, no, no.
I would say I
Finish.
wonder if it's the kind of thing where like every people collect these and then
Yeah.
it's like because you have this collection, it's like, well, which ones stand out? It's like, well, startups, but it's standing out
Hmm.
over some games that just like don't really work that
Yep.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my impression as well. I really wanted the experience to pop,
Hmm.
and for there to be a bit more variety. I was so hopeful because it's a beautiful game that I would love to. Only games are awesome. You plop it on the table and everyone's excited to jump in. But I think
You do
there's
want to
something
just
to what you're
collect
saying,
them
Jake.
because they're cute,
Yeah,
right? I
they're
like
tasty
having
little
them. Yeah,
packages. What about Insider? Have you played Insider,
yeah. I think
Jake?
Insiders just like doesn't work really very well.
Yeah. Okay,
I think it's
interesting.
fine. It's fine,
Yeah.
but like there are other games in that space that just do it better. It might be a
Yeah.
uh blasphemy to some, but I've played Werewords as well, and I think that's
Mm.
like a much better implementation of this system. And honestly, I might just rather play 20 questions than
Yeah.
Insider.
Interesting.
Um, and I think like a fake artist goes to New York is another one that's like Insider, where it's like amazing concept. Like
Yeah.
I
Sure.
love the concept of both like 20 questions with a secret trader. Like what a fantastic pitch that is for Insider. And
Yeah.
similarly, like, you know, it's like a spy fall, but you're drawing a picture, right? Where
Sure.
everybody knows what you're drawing except for one person and you have to guess what they are but in practice like it just seems like whenever I tried it with my friends it's like fell apart really quickly where it's just like either like
Yeah.
so obvious, you know, it's surprisingly easy to like help the table know that you know what a picture is without giving anything away, you know. I think that is
Sure.
the fatal flaw, you know, where
Yeah.
like you hear that premise and you're like, okay, I might be able to get some idea based on like what other people are doing. But like when you're doing like a
Yeah.
squiggle to just like invoke like the that, you know, I'm doing like a 3/4 of a coconut and I placed it here
Sure.
because of that. It's like you're not giving anything away, and then somebody's just doing something wrong. Like that just has how my
Yeah, sure.
plays have panned out far more often than not.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't played a fake artist goes to New York. It's always been one that I'm intrigued to, like I'm intrigued by. I want to try
Yeah.
it, but clearly not quite enough because I could easily make it and have us try it, and I haven't done
It
that
feels
yet.
like
So,
a game that like is maybe in both the case of Insider and a fake artist goes to New York to like do the annoying thing of like redesigning the games. It feels like maybe these are games that are like too developed almost,
mm,
where they need a
yeah,
couple more rules to actually like make it work well.
interesting. I enjoyed my play of Insider, but it's been a long
Yeah.
time since I played it. I like that it was sort of positive player interaction. Oink is also just constrained by the size of their boxes that they've decided their whole game has to fit into
Yeah.
always. which is sort of, yeah, it's limiting. But yeah,
Cool.
that's like a little Oink interlude. Startups, for me, a pass.
Yeah.
But Scout, you're my number
I
one.
would say Oink games tier list real quick. Scout S,
Yeah,
Deep
easy.
Sea Avenger A,
Okay.
Insider, and Fake Artist C. And those are the only
Interesting.
ones I've played.
Interesting. Okay, for me, it's more like, okay, Scout S tier, then everything else I've played, which is only startups. And okay,
Wait, they
no,
did publish Modern Art,
Insider.
right?
Okay, that does not count.
Okay.
We're not counting that. But okay, fine. Scout and Modern Art S, Insider A,
Modern Art A for
and
me.
then Modern Art
Or
A.
B,
Interesting.
maybe.
Okay,
I haven't played in a while.
and then there's like a jump.
Yeah.
I'm like, I played Deep Sea once. I was not into it. I don't know. It's
Deep
fine.
Sea, it's like, it's a bit. It's like a party trick where it's
It is a
like,
bit. That's the problem. They're all
yeah,
bits.
right, totally.
Startup is a game trying not to be a bit, but it's just a bit.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the problem that I had. Yeah.
All right.
It's like, oh yeah, clever idea. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about another
Okay,
game.
startups. It's a pass, unfortunately, for Brendan. All right, so my next game is Bullet Heart Emoji. Bullet Heart, bullet greater than 3, whatever you want to call it. And this is a 2021 game designed by Joshua Van Lanningham of Level 99 Games, or published by Level 99 Games. We're fans of Level 99 Games. We really enjoyed BattleCon. Please go back and listen to
Yeah.
that episode. I think it's one of the most interesting episodes we've done because of Brendan and I's passion both for that game and of the source material of the kind of fighting game, video game genre. Um, and they have also done like Exceed. They've done Millennium Blades. A lot of really cool, evocative stuff of a certain thing, right? Sort of like the
Their
anime
games are different.
aesthetic, sort of the video
Yep.
game, so
Yeah.
on and so forth. And level 99, their ethos is definitely infused into Bullet Heart, which is a board game trying to evoke the bullet hell genre of video games. Brendan, are you a bullet hell fan?
I've played a few games in this genre. I was more likely to pop a quarter into an arcade machine and play like a shoot 'em up bullet hell type game than I was. I haven't played them in a long
Mhm.
time. I think it's
I
fun.
played
Yeah,
Enter
but
the
like,
Gungeon on the Switch.
oh
And
sure,
I like
okay,
that a lot. It
interesting.
was very fun. Um,
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, basically, that the idea is that in these bullet hell video games, if you're not familiar, is that you're a little character roaming around and there's just like, or a spaceship or something, right? And
sure.
there's just like damage flying at you from all directions. So you have to constantly be like using your movement to avoid
Yeah,
while you're progressing through the level in the game and taking down foes and so on and so forth. So the way that looks in Bullet is that you have a grid that is constantly being filled up by these like circles they're like tokens you're drawing out of the bag, and when you draw them they have to go onto your grid. If there's no space for them on the grid, then you take damage and you have like 3 damage. There's a variable player powers type thing, so some characters can take more damage than others. But basically I think there's 4 different columns in your grid that represent different colors in the game. So you'll draw a green token with like a number 3 on it. So that means you have to put it into the green grid and down 3 spaces. And then, but if something is in that space already, then it has to go like 1 further down. So as
interesting.
your columns get more filled up, there's more numbers that you can draw that are going to kill you because, oh, I can't put it 3. Oh, there's something 4, and now it's like falling off entirely.
Did it feel like a shoot 'em up?
No,
It sounds
no,
so
no,
abstract. Okay,
definitely not. It feels more like Candy Crush
okay,
or
interesting. That's
like
kind of where my
or
head
like
went. Like a numbers
Bejeweled or like
abstract.
something like
Sure,
that. Because
like a matching
right.
game.
So the way the game works is you're drawing these things out of your bag, and in order to like survive the round, you have to draw out
Yep.
all of the tokens in your bag. But you also have some amount of resources to like do different abilities on your board, which will be like moving the tokens around on your grid. Like I could spend like the character I was using was like spend 2 energy to move something up 1, or like 1 energy to move it left or right 1. So you're moving them around, and then at the top of your board you have these cards that are like your character's like moves. So mine
Hmm.
was like 1 billion pound hammer drop or something, and like in order to like use that card, I had to basically create the pattern shown on that
Sure.
card on my grid. So then once I do that,
Interesting.
I get to like take all of those, or not all of them, but like it'll show like a certain number of those tokens are then like consumed by it. And I take
Sure.
those
Take them
and I
off your
pass
board.
them to the person on my left. And whatever I
Oh,
pass to
okay.
them in the next round of the game is going to be like going into their bag. So that's kind of like interesting. So we played a 4-player game, so you're always sort of like fighting. You're dealing damage to the person on your left and like receiving damage like in the form of this from the person on your right.
Have you ever played Puzzle Fighter, Jake? Do you know about this genre?
No, I haven't played Puzzle Fighter. I know Aurora's talked about Puzzle Fighter a lot in our
Or
Discord.
let's talk about Puzzle
Oh,
Strike,
that's
which is a
Puzzle
riff
Strike.
on Puzzle
Okay.
Fighter. It's the same idea, though. Okay, so basically, this is genre done by Capcom in the late 90s. That's
Oh,
pretty much exactly what you're
like
saying, where it's a
Puyo Pop or whatever. Yeah, I
right, where it's
played
a
that
falling
one.
block game where you're when you succeed at removing things, they go to your
Yeah.
opponent. So it sounds like Bullet is a mashup of like that Puzzle Fighter type idea with the theming of a
Yeah,
shoot 'em
that
up.
makes more sense, honestly.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it feels much more like that arcade game than it does like a bullet hell or whatever.
I like that that's the interactivity of you passing it to the player on your left. That's really
Yeah.
cool. So what do you
So
think?
I had a great time with it, and we played it in the not real time mode.
Oh, you can play it
So
real
you can
time
play it
too. So it's
real
really
time,
Puzzle
like where I
Fighter.
think you have like
Okay.
5 minutes ago, or you can do it like not real time. And the way the not real time works is like basically rounds start sync, like everybody's starting at the same time, and then like whoever finishes going through their bag first gets like a bonus, or their first choice
Huh.
of
Okay.
bonus or whatever. Um,
So it's still a little real
yeah,
time.
there's still like you're still like racing a little bit. Yeah, you're on your turn, you're
Interesting.
still playing real time, right? You take out a token, put on your board, then I can do whatever I want to manipulate it, spend my
Okay.
energy or whatever. Or I could just start
Sure.
pulling out more and more tokens and putting them on my board.
Gotcha.
But then you have to like sort of calculate, right? It's like, oh, if I draw a red 3 right now, like it's gonna deal me a damage. So like, I maybe I take a time to try and like use one of my pattern cards now
Powers.
or
Okay.
whatever. So yeah,
How long
it
is
was
this
really
game?
cool. Our game was probably so it was me and Bridget's first time playing. And I think that the people we were playing with had played and teaching us had played once before. It probably took 30 to 45 minutes
Cool.
to
So
teach
it's
it, but
it's like midweight.
it's
Yeah.
quick, and I think our game lasted like 4 or 5 rounds, and I lost.
Yeah.
I guess important to know I was eliminated like a full round before. I think me
Yeah.
and like
Okay.
Jamie were both out, and then the 2 other people were playing like a whole nother round. We were just kind of like sitting there heckling. So there is like slight player elimination. I think it would be pretty unlikely that somebody's eliminated like more than 1 round before the final round, right? But that's
Yeah.
something that could
Yeah. Yeah.
happen. Um, so
Interesting.
yeah, it was cool. And I guess if you play it real time, then it's like 20 minutes max because it's like a 5 minute round or something like that. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
would be really interested to try that. And the different like player powers were pretty cool too. Because they're like just I was playing like a really basic one. I think I had like 4 health, where Jamie's character only had 2 health, but he could like spend a lot of energy to like after picking up he was like he had like prescience. So like after picking up a token out of the bag, he could like pause and do something before placing it to like expending resource. So that like really changed up, I think, the kind of the way that he was thinking about it. And then like one of the other players of the game was using one that's patterns work totally differently, and it was like about like adding and subtracting numbers together rather than creating shapes. So that was kind of cool too, the different puzzles that we were all doing. So
This looks.
yeah.
It sounds really cool.
Yeah.
The grid also, I want to say, is a 6x5, so it's a pretty
Oh
big
yeah.
grid. It's
I guess
also
5
it's
colors,
hard to
not 4.
overstate. It's 5. Okay. It's so anime.
Yeah.
It's so
I
anime.
mean,
It's so
yeah, the
anime.
level 99 like aesthetic is here. Like And I kind of like, admire it in some ways. It's not my favorite aesthetic, but I
Yeah.
like that they're sort of like unapologetically like this is what us and our
We do.
fans are into. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that the gameplay is solid underneath. And
I
I
want to
think
play.
the design throughout all the offerings of the company I've played so far has been really strong work, and I think it's
Yeah.
no different here. I think you would like it a lot.
This one I would love to play with you.
Yeah,
It looks really cool. Can you play it too? Do you know?
yeah. I don't see why not.
Yeah. Okay. Oh wow. It looks like it supports 1 to 4 players, and BGG suggests it's best at
All
2,
right, there you go.
which makes sense with the passing.
Yeah,
Cool.
no chance for
So that
like
was
player elimination in that case.
exactly right. Then you just
Yeah,
lose. So that was Jake's thoughts on level 99's Bullet Heart. Also, notably, there's a follow up, Bullet Star. So maybe we'll peek at that.
Geekway,
But
Geekway. We'll play. We could play a Geekway.
ooh, nice.
Maybe.
Jake, do you know what time
What
it is?
time is it?
It's time for the Reiner Knizia special interlude.
Rhino Canoe!
Let's go. So, my favorite part of every episode, obviously, Reiner Knizia is one of my favorite designers of all time.
Brendan.
Knizia is one of my favorite designers of all time.
So embarrassing for us.
Rhino Kniz is one of my favorite designers of all time.
Talking about this great designer while just like woefully failing
Slandering
to pronounce his name correctly.
Okay, the Doctor, Rhino the Doctor. That's our nickname, right?
No.
Great. Okay, well, let's get into it. So I'm a huge fan of Dr. Knizia's.
Knizia, Brendan.
Dr. Knizia.
Brendan.
Dr. Knizia. Knizia. God. Dr. Knizia's.
Why are you doing this?
Oeuvre,
Is this a bit?
Ludology.
This is a bit.
Is it a bit? I'm a huge fan of all of his
Rhino
games.
Rhino Kniz.
Rhino Kniz. There we go.
Okay.
Like Tigris and Euphrates, Babylonia, Blue Lagoon. These are games that I really love. Other games that are grouped into this, right? The original 3 that people always reference are
Samurai,
Tigris and Euphrates, Through the Desert, and Samurai. Yep. And those would lay the groundwork and sort of inspiration for the ones that followed up, Yellow and Yangtze, Babylonia, and Blue Lagoon.
Blue Lagoon.
Yeah. So for the first time, I wanted to seek out and play. I've played Tigris and Euphrates, but I had never played Through the Desert or Samurai. So I want to seek those out and sort of see the inspiration and influence that created some of my favorite games of all time, like Blue Lagoon and Babylonia. So I returned all the way back to the 1998 Through the Desert. Through the Desert is a beloved game that, for a few reasons, I think. One, it's incredibly approachable. It supports a broad range of players, and it has delicious little plastic camels that are really fun to look at and maybe less functional from a game utility point of view than they should be. I've found some of the colors a little bit hard to distinguish in evening light, which is really that's the light I would like.
You're old, dude.
I want that evening light. I am old. I'm so blind.
Me too. I can't see shit anymore. I used to be able to see so well. I can't see anything.
I know, right? All my coworkers are like, "Why do you wear glasses now?" And I'm like, "Because I'm blind. Having a child sapped my ability to see anything, and I didn't even bring him into the world myself." But anyway, Through the Desert. Okay, so I've primarily played Through the Desert physically on the table with Maya at 2 players, and I do want to add that caveat because I think that all of the games in this tile-laying trilogy work better and worse at different player counts to varying degrees. And there's different reasons for why that is. One of the big ones is scaling. So how does the board shift based on its player count? In Babylonia, there's a whole scaled version of that game that really shrinks and forces conflict into a smaller space. And the groundwork was laid for that in some ways here, because in Through the Desert, there's a smaller version of the map for 2 players. So to start off, that's great. Big things that come to mind for me, Jake, whenever I'm playing a tile laying game by Reiner Knizia is how many tiles do I get to play on a turn? The answer here, right, because in Babylonia, it can range from anywhere from 2 to, let's get really crazy and say 6, which could technically be possible. 7 could even be possible. Realistically, it's like 2 to 4. But that feels really differently than a game like Tigris and Euphrates, where you're always playing 2 tiles or Blue Lagoon, where you're just playing one tile a turn. That really impacts the feel of the game. And Through the Desert, it's 2. Another big thing is, how does placement work? Do I have to only place adjacently to pieces I've already placed, or can I place anywhere on the board? In Through the Desert, you have to always place adjacently to pieces of the same color that you've already placed, because there's these 5 shared colors. So you're pulling from a shared pool of tiles, of camels, and the game ends when any one of those groups disappears. So that's an interesting dynamic in this game, that you're pulling from the shared group, and then you all have control of when the end game might occur based on one of those supplies of camels running out. I really like that element of the game, and it's something that's not present in a lot of the other tiling games, where you have your own pieces, or it's a shared pool that's just a bag like Tigris and Euphrates, where all the tiles are in there. One thing about Through the Desert that's really important, though, is because of this need to play adjacent to your caravans of the same color, you start the game with this really important decision, where you're playing these leader camels to the board that are marked with your player color. And I found that those decisions were really interesting, but it made the game really fragile, because there was a potential to blunder that opening phase in a way that makes it not necessarily, I mean, you could blunder it so hard it would be impossible to come back and win. But even from there, I think the decisional footprint of those first turns of placing leaders in my plays with Maya felt a little too high compared to the decisions that came after, to the point where sometimes it felt like the game was almost decided in that opening go about, just based on where things went on the board. And we found ourselves a few times where Maya was sort of like, okay, can I concede and we can just play again? Because it's clear halfway through that you've won this one.
Wow. So that's like Rhino Kniz doing a splatter. Before
Almost in a
splatter,
way. And I think
Rhino
that,
Kniz
interestingly,
invented
Jake,
splatter.
yeah, you heard it here first. It's a inside break. I think that we see this iteration where, in some ways, Blue Lagoon is sort of the game that gets referenced as the one that kind of follows up in the footprint of Through the Desert more so. And I think a big part of that is, in Blue Lagoon, you have these 2 phases where you play all over the board once, and then you start again, and you have what are functionally leaders that you've placed on the board, but you place them within the first round. You have these huts that you place out, and that's where you start placing from in the second time through the game. And I think that works way better in terms of having the decision space feel a little bit less fragile from the outset. But that game's much longer. I think it doesn't actually scale as well. I like that game much more at 3 or 4. And I don't really like it at 2 because the board is so big. That's Blue Lagoon.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed playing Through the Desert, and I'd like to play it at higher player counts to get a sense for the feel. But I will say, at 2 player, I think that it's going to be hard pressed for me to invite Maya to play a Knizia tile laying game and not have it be Babylonia just in our collection right now.
So, I mean, like, for you, you're such a huge fan of all of these games that it's worth it just from like an academic pursuit, right?
Sure.
To kind of go back to the source material. This is like you like being like Citizen Kane is my favorite movie again, basically. So what I'm trying to
Oh my gosh.
So my question is, Brendan, let me finish.
Brendan,
let me finish. So my question is, for the rest of us who maybe don't have the same like academic desire, would you recommend going back to 1998 to revisit or visit for the first time Through the Desert? Or like, we can just skip that, we can just play Babylonia?
I think, Jake, that outside of an academic pursuit, I would recommend skipping it. I think that if you haven't played any of these games, starting with Through the Desert, despite its charming, if not not quite functional presentation, it'd be better to just jump in with Blue Lagoon or Babylonia. I think that they show the product of iteration in their design, and they've clearly learned from some of the mistakes made in these earlier games. Not that there's a lot of mistakes here. It's a wonderful game, but I just think it's a tough sell. You'd have to get it secondary. It's a little bit more expensive. And I don't think that the game that's offered is all that much more interesting or better. It's different. The one nice thing about all the games in this series is that they do stand alone. They're tweaks on a similar idea that are doing a totally different thing. But at the end of the day, if you've never tried Blue Lagoon or Babylonia, start there.
Interesting.
Also, now we get to talk about Orson Welles, right? Because I just, that skip Citizen Kane straight to Touch of Evil. That intro sequence, so phenomenal. I can't believe Jake just signed him up for a whole 50-minute conversation on that.
It is interesting. I'm just going to ignore that and say like I feel the same way that you're describing when I like revisited or visited for the first time like Notre Dame by Stefan
Oh,
Feld,
sure, by
where I
Feld.
was like, this
Yeah.
is cool. Like this is like an old Feld game. Like it's very good, but
Yeah.
also like it's not one that I've really gotten off myself outside of like the first like after like the first couple plays of owning it. Like there are
Yeah.
like other versions of not not exactly the same, but like there are other games sort of in that I own from Steffenfeld that are ones I like just a bit more and would rather play at this point. But at the same, it's almost like the analogy I want to draw is like seeing a movie. It's like I'm glad I saw the movie. You know, I had a
Totally.
good experience seeing the movie, but I don't necessarily need to like see it again and again. And that's where the analogy falls apart a bit because board games are not movies. But like
Yeah.
that's as we've been playing more and more games for this show, I honestly think that's like something I want to start baking in a little bit more into like my reviews. It's just like this is a game that like I'm glad I saw the movie and now
Now
I
I
feel
can
like
move
that's
on.
like a lot of like the sevens for us, right? Where it's like this
Yeah,
was like
totally.
totally good and fun. And if you like this kind of thing, play it.
Yeah.
But I'm not like now that I've seen it, I'm kind of like glad I did and ready to move on.
Okay, here's a question for you though. This is one I'm dealing with. Is you're a huge Feld fan, so Notre Dame found its way into your collection. I'm a huge Knizia fan, so Through the Desert's in
Wow,
mine.
nice
Now that I've
pronunciation there.
thank you. I'm trying to make a joke about it a bit, but I don't want to go there. So we own these now. We've experienced them. We've quote unquote seen the movie. What happens to the game? Is it nice to keep it in case I want to share it with someone else in the future? Just in case I want to return to it in the future, or do you feel with Notre Dame's kind of a different case because I think that game's like $12 on the secondary market or
Yeah, I
something,
got it real
right?
cheap. But that I don't
Yeah,
think that
but
really changes anything for this, right? Because it's more at this point, it's
right.
like whatever your investment is, probably if the
Do
games
you
are
get it back or do you
occupying
just
the
keep it?
same place for us,
Yeah,
should it be something that you sold on to? I think it just depends how much of a collector you are. I've got a little bit
yeah.
of a collector bug in that like a Feld game is one of the few that I'm
You'll
probably
hang on
not
to.
going to get rid of just because I like that I'm building out this like collection and maybe I will revisit in like another year or two or whatever. Um,
Yeah,
but I think like in general, that's probably like not a super rational way to think about things. And if it's a game like if you've run out of space, then that's probably
yeah,
like a good candidate to maybe gift to somebody else so that they can sort of experience that the once or twice that they
totally.
need to, and then
Fantasy
move it on
Flight got
again.
me, Jake. They got me. They made that beautiful Euro Classics version. Then I got it. Now it matches Taj Mahal, which I don't really love that much, but now I have them both. They look nice. Do I go try to get
Yeah.
Samurai now? Do
This
I
is
go
why
get
I'm staying
Raw?
far, far away from like the city masterpiece, Feld City Masterpiece series by
Oh,
Queen Games. But at least they made it easy to stay away from by pricing them at like
but
$120 a pop.
they're like more expensive than the out of print Knizia Euro
Yeah,
Classics
it's
on the
so
secondary
crazy.
market.
That's
It's
just so
crazy.
insane.
Can I say one more quick thing on Through the Desert before we go to Ark Nova, which is just one thing about the game that I did really love, Jake, is there's so much passive pressure because but you can never combine caravans of the same color between players. And what that, right? So my green camel caravan could never connect to yours. So what that means functionally is I can block off whole parts of the board by getting just close enough and then never committing again, which I found totally wonderful and interesting and
That sounds
awesome
like,
because
hey,
there's
that's
not
my
a
fish a little bit. Right,
almost, yeah,
where it's like you can
interesting.
like kind of position yourself in a way that's like, yeah, you better
You
not, yeah,
disincentivize
like you better
action.
not go
Yeah,
over here because you'll be in
yep.
big
It almost
trouble, even though I
escalates.
don't actually want to move that way, type of deal.
Yep. Totally. Maya found this so aggressive and terrible that she was sort of like, why are we doing this? It's so frustrating. And there's another mechanism, Jake, that I'd be remiss not to mention, which is this sort of encircling mechanism where you're trying to block off whole parts of the board that's not present in any of the others. That was fun, but I don't know. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze. I'm going to go play Babylonia. Ziggurats all the
Yeah.
way.
All right. Well, we'll need to get your Knizia, gosh, Knizia, Rhino
Jake's it on the
Kniz,
bit.
Rhino Kniz tier list sometime very soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Last one, Ark Nova. So I've only played Ark Nova one time. It's a game that probably doesn't need much of an introduction. I think it's like what number like 4 on the Board Game Geek best board games of all time right now. A game very much akin to something like Terraforming Mars in the sense that it is a card-driven game where you are building out a player board. In this case, it's a personal player board, your zoo, as opposed to a shared player board like in Terraforming Mars. But pretty similar in that like overarching mechanic sense. I've seen a lot of takes that are like, how could anybody compare this game to Terraforming Mars? And it's just like very easily. There are like many like
Yeah.
similar things about it. Like, no, it's not the same game. I do think it's a better game after just
Mm.
one play of it. The really cool mechanism, which I guess is a riff or like a wholesale uh,
Borrow.
copy and paste
Yeah.
snip from what is it like some Civ game, A Dawn of Civilization, A
Yeah,
New
let's get
Dawn.
we got to get the Yeah, I think you got it. Civilization A New Dawn,
Yeah,
2017.
and the
Yep.
way so that the mechanism is like how you actually take actions, where you have like these five, I think five cards, um, and you can use any of them on your turn, but whatever wherever it is from slot 1 to 5 tells you like the power level of that card.
Mm.
So you want to be
Yep.
using the higher power level cards because when you take a card out, it slides everything down. So
Yep.
that's just a really cool mechanism that just creates uh internally into that a lot of like medium and long term planning where you want to like set
Yeah.
up sequences of plays so that you're constantly using, your high powered cards 4 or 5 over and over and over because you just get so much more value out of that than using lower power cards. But everything else in the game seems to work against this tactically. Um, because it has a lot of like in Terraforming Mars sort of a tag system. So like every animal that you would want to get for an enclosure has like a certain type of requirement for what you would need to have built in your zoo. Um, and it also could have like a requirement for I think like where you're at on the. It has the as an aside, it has the Rajas of the Ganges score
Score
tracker
system.
system where you have to like you have two different scores going on. One is like income and one is appeal of your zoo. And when they cross, that triggers the last round of the game. And whoever has overlap by the most, that's your final score type of vibe. So I think there's like the restrictions. You need like a certain amount of money to play something. You have to have like the right kind of enclosure built in your zoo. You might have to have some other forms of like being a certain distance on the appeal track, maybe. I can't remember exactly, but there's like 4 or 5 different considerations that you might possibly have to have before something could go into your zoo. So the effect of it is like, okay, I want to use my 5 power card, but like that allows me to buy an animal. But before I buy an animal, I have to like get more income. But like before I get more income, ideally I'd want to like go up more on the income track so that I'm like, you know what I mean? So it's like and then like to do before I do that, like, oh, a good way to get more income would be to like build this animal into my zoo. So it's sort of like has this like incredible, whichever action you want to take has like this kind of like extremely bandwidth testing chain of sequencing that you'd want to do to like achieve it optimally. And so that's what I found like the on my turn or preferably on my opponent's turn on like pre-planning is like okay, like I like trying to figure out like trace all the way back on any one thing to like what is the starting point for this sequence, and it like and invariably that's like, oh, that's the card that's in my like one spot. Well, I don't want to do that because that's like such an inefficient use of
Sure.
that card. So then you like start going down this whole other chain of thinking, and it's like
Interesting.
it's a heavy game. It has a lot of like really satisfying turns, um because like any and it's essentially an engine building game, right? Every time you put an animal in, that's going to give you more income. When you get more income or more appeal, you're like crossing certain like barriers on the track, which gives you some other bonus. That can make it so that, oh, every time you put like this type of animal or like this type of region animal from like a certain part of the world, a South American animal into your zoo, like that's triggering this other thing, and so on and so forth. So it has like really satisfying progression, lots of I would say like some long-term strategy, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm like maybe going for this like overarching theme with my zoo, but most of it like lives in that like middle ground of like, extremely complex to navigate tactical play with, I think, like a really high skill ceiling in like finding the best tactical plays on any given turn, and strategy that's like a sequence of like 3 or 4 turns out type of thing.
Mm.
And I think that is obviously for many people a big sweet spot of this sort of like waxing power game. In so many ways is it's waxing.
What about for Jake Friedman?
I liked it enough that I would want to play it again. My play was long, but the group I was playing with tends to run a bit long on
Mm.
games. I It has definitely a feeling of like you can like build something that's like, okay, great. Whenever I play a primate, I get a bonus, and you just like no more primates do you ever have the
Come up.
opportunity to
Yeah.
take. That doesn't bother me as much. I kind of like uh that type of like variability and randomness. But I think that could be a drawback for many people. I don't know. I liked it enough that I want to play it again. I definitely didn't walk away from it thinking this is the best board game I've ever played, which is
Sure.
like a high bar to
Mark.
set,
Yeah.
but almost like that sort of is like the bar that has been raised for this game for me, just because it's just been so universally beloved and praised. But
Was it the best board game you played last
I
month?
played it in January,
Okay.
so no. Easy
Okay.
answer.
Yeah.
uh,
What about in January?
It's a good question. It's just so hard. It's like
Yeah,
really
it's
just
like a
because of like
maybe.
who I am. It's really difficult for me to ever say like a heavy game that took like 3.5 hours to play. It was the best game I
Yeah.
played because like the same day I played like Bullet Heart, and I was like, oh, this is a really fun experience, and took like 45 minutes.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
is it like 4 times more fun and enjoyable than Bullet Heart? I don't know. I don't think that it
Yeah.
is for
Totally.
me. But also, we are
Yeah.
people that, I thought Terraforming Mars was like good, not great. You hate Terraforming Mars. You think Terraforming Mars is like the worst game of all time.
Okay. 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 Not quite that far.
Okay, that's too far. But there's so much shared DNA between the two that like I
Yeah.
think this is for like many people like makes Terraforming Mars obsolete. And for a
Mm,
lot of
sure.
people, Terraforming Mars was like a top 5 game for them. So when
Yeah.
something
Which
comes
is
along that just is like, oh man, like this is even better than Terraforming Mars in that same space, you like would immediately know after that play, like, wow, this is a top 5 game for me or better.
yeah, that's a huge achievement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was hard. It's hard for me. I can find plenty of gripes in the game, but like I
Mm,
think it's a strong design. The biggest gripes for me would be anytime there's like your like production is like $36 and you're getting like all this stuff all the time, and you're getting like every time you hit an income, you're getting like all these other like bonuses and things to track. So whenever that happens, and that's basically like any engine building game, I'm always like looking side eye at everyone around the table. Like it feels like somebody's gonna like mess up something, unintentionally or whatever. I don't know. Like maybe like get this on Board Game Arena would be sick.
I think you gotta. I hear you, but at the end of the day, this is board games. I'm really intrigued. I think the fact that you want to play it again is enough to keep me intrigued and excited to try it.
I have that like negative bias going in, and I was still won over by it.
That's a good sign.
Yeah,
So interesting. Jake's thoughts on Ark Nova. Hopefully, I'll get to share my thoughts on
yeah.
it
More to
at
come.
some
More
point
to
too.
come. I think something we should, if we get the chance to play it more, perhaps would be a good one to do an episode on.
Cool. Awesome. We hope that you all enjoyed this sort of new-ish format, kind of riffing on our mini reviews. Definitely let us know in the either in our Discord. Give us your thoughts in the episode discussion channel. You can find a link to that in our show notes. Remember our sort of request for reviews. If you have time, it goes so far for the show. And if we get to 30 written reviews, it could be as simple as the show's incredible, or I love those What We Talk About episodes. We're going to do a bonus episode. I also want to mention for our pre-planners, the people who play games along with us, that coming up is Messina, the Resistance, and maybe we'll fit Scout in there somewhere. Also, thank you to Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.